Terry Mattingly, who is a longtime friend of our community, and in some sense a returning son as well, but he'll get into that. But he is now, along with his dear wife Deborah, have moved back to Johnson City just within the last couple months.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. And
not that big town.
Back within our community. So we're very, very blessed to have them here, and especially to have Terry this morning to offer some thoughts. If you haven't heard Terry speak before, or if you're not familiar with his regular column, his Substack, and so on, please do so, because it is rife with some great insights and information and synthesis of what's going on in the world these days, especially with regards to the intersection of religion and culture. That's really where Terry's wheelhouse is. I'm going to cheat a little bit and read the biography here from his brochure. It says Terry is a veteran religion beats scribe in the mainstream press with over 30 years with the National on Religion column, which is, again, very, very much worth subscribing to. And the former leader of the Washington Journalism Center program, the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. He has taught courses on mass media and religion at Denver Seminary, Milligan University, which we should all be familiar with, and Palm Beach Atlantic University, and is now a senior fellow at St. Constantine College in Houston. For 20 years, he's led GetReligion.org, a website, now a research archive on religion news coverage in the mainstream press. And also in this brochure, one quote I want to pull out for you from an admirer. He says, "Your writing is good, thinking is solid and solidly Christian, and the matters you address are vitally important. Your piece on the temptations of the smartphone age is a perfect example." And that's from someone named Father Gregory Matthews Green. So you have many admirers here in the church already. And of course, Terry and Deborah and their family go back with the Matthews Greens for many years as well. So while my family and I, well, those of us with the last name Matthews, have heard you speak many times and have read many things that you've written, we really can't get enough. And so we're always appreciative of the opportunity for you to share more of your insights of what's going on in the world and how we can better prepare ourselves. So with all of that said, let us please welcome Terry Mattingly.
Thank you. I'll put the Matthews Greens in the timeline of this first talk at the appropriate place. Our goal here today is to talk about Orthodox homes. And in some ways, just by kind of who I am and what I do, I'm separating the Orthodox home in a strange way from the Orthodox Church. Because to some degree, there are things that we can talk about here, but when we talk about them at home, we really are kind of on our own journeys, and we're on our own turf. So I don't want you to think today that I'm telling you what you should do in your Orthodox homes. It's very important for you to hear me say that. All of us have different stories and even different timelines of how we came to Orthodoxy, and frankly, how we're dealing with it, how we're coping with it. So I want to start off with two stories from my own family's experience, which is kind of how we got on the Orthodox road. And it says something about our culture that these stories were 30-something years ago now, or more like 27, I guess, 28. The first one is the night when the door to Orthodoxy just got kicked open in the lives of several families in Johnson City. And we were part of a mainline Protestant church in Johnson City. I'll just say one with red doors, and we'll leave it at that. And things were going on in the national church that we weren't all that crazy about, and we were talking about it. But we decided what we needed to do was have a house church that would meet on Sunday nights, and we could at least pray together, and we could try to face the future together. So one night we were done with our Bible study, and we were all sitting around. The people who drink coffee were drinking coffee, and the teenagers from the families trooped through the back door because they had been at church youth group. And a doctor in our midst called out to one of his sons, "Hey son, what did y'all do at youth group tonight?" And it's one of those moments that's just like frozen in time for me. The teenager walks over and stands at the end of the table where the adults were all sitting and says, "Well, I think we prayed to Satan." And that will get the attention of the parents, pretty quick. And we're like, "What?" And he went, "Well, it was like an environmental thing at youth group tonight, and there was this prayer from the National Church, and we prayed to the moon, we prayed to the sun, we prayed to the universe." And he said, "That's pantheism, isn't it, Dad?" And to some degree, that was the night when that circle of families was headed to Orthodoxy, kind of like it or not, kind of heading to Orthodoxy with an urgency. The second story is much more normal, and it takes place at the start of Nativity Lent in 1997. We had a lot of conversations with the man who would become our first spiritual father, the late Father Gordon Walker of Franklin, Tennessee, the large, huge now St. Ignatius Parish. And we had decided we're going to need to do something in Johnson City to kind of create a place where some converts can gather and come to Orthodoxy. And so we formed a catechumen class. And I'll always remember the first night. Deborah was at work that night, and I'd cooked dinner. And I walked in, and our children, who at that point are like 10 and 5, 11 and 6-ish, so right in that school, are sitting there at the table, and I put on the table a plate of pasta, with some small shrimp and some sort of mix that probably had too much margarine in it to be canonical or something. But, I did my best, and I said, okay, we used to call this Advent. We're now in Nativity Lent, and our family has decided that we're converting to Orthodoxy. That's why we started an icon corner in a corner of the dining room, and this is where we're going. And I explained we're going to try to keep the fast to the best of our ability, with our children, and explained what it was. And I said, that's why you're eating what you're eating tonight. And I remember my daughter, Sarah, who now with her husband and their 5 kids live in the great Orthodox city of Wichita, Kansas. And I remember Sarah holding her fork and kind of looking down at what's on her plate, and takes like a forkful and looks at it and goes, "Okay, now we're Orthodox." And begins eating her meal. And isn't it just that practical, folks? I mean, aren't there things that when you're wrestling with being Orthodox in a culture around you that is Bible Belt or cable TV or internet or whatever the culture is around you, in the midst of that, you're building an Orthodox home. And it will be your Orthodox home. And when you deal with something like Christmas, you all have your own Christmases, right? And your own extended families, and there are the stories that go back. And my goal my goal today is not to mess with that much. There's a phrase I grew up in Texas, there's a phrase in the South called, "the preacher's gone to meddling." Now, gone to meddling, usually that has to do when it's time to talk about tithing and giving to the church once a year and doing your pledge card. But gone to meddling is when the preacher has stopped talking about theology in some safe way and is now telling you that actually affects this. And that's called meddling. And to some degree, I'm going to do some meddling. But I want to repeat again, I know that at the level of the home, you need to develop what your house can do, what your home can do, what you can do as parents, children, grandparents, etc. First of all, this is an Orthodox retreat, and it's strange that I'm not wearing a black robe and I don't have a clerical collar. I picked the only thing I have that has anything like, I have the seal of Byzantium on the front of this, which ought to get me at least some credibility here. And if some of you would like to talk about this interesting experiment that's going on called the College of St. Constantine, it's actually a very interesting thing, and I'd be glad to talk about that at lunch with some of you. Because let's face it, Orthodox parents, and not just for financial reasons, are going to be looking for some alternatives in education at all levels. And St. Constantine is an interesting example under the leadership of now retired Bishop Basil of Wichita, an attempt to create a uniquely Orthodox school at an affordable level that includes college. I don't have a degree from a seminary, although interestingly enough, I ended up teaching at one briefly. I'm a journalist, I'm not a scholar. My academic background is a weird mix of church history, mass media, political science, and even a little bit of law. Been running into all those notes, unpacking as we moved into the house in Elizabeth, and things I barely can remember. Mainly, I'm a guy who writes about religion in the public press, which means I need to write about it in ways that maybe even people who are not believers of any kind might be able to understand. So that's really who I am. I'm a journalist who was too academic for the newsroom. And I'm also a journalist who was too journalist for the colleges in many cases. I felt caught in the middle throughout my entire career. What matters today, as I said earlier, is that I'm an Orthodox husband, father, and grandfather. It will help to understand that my own father was a Southern Baptist minister, and I'm really, really thankful for my heritage. The late Father Gordon Walker, as some of you, if any of you knew him, I don't think I ever heard Father Gordon speak a negative word about his heritage as a Baptist and the life that led him to Orthodoxy. And that's my goal. Very, very early in this process, I met some Episcopalians named Father Gary and Frederica. I first met them by telephone, interviewing Frederica for a piece I was writing about the organization Feminists for Life. At that point, I was in Denver, and they were somewhere in Baltimore. I didn't know anything about Baltimore. Our paths would cross later when, as Father mentioned the other day, we were in two stints members of their church, Holy Cross, outside of Baltimore, for 12 years, a goodly amount of time. Knew Father Stephen when he was like that tall and doing infamous quotes about things like Frederica asking, why do men put up with women? Why do they put up with what we do? And the 10-year-old or 11-year-old in the back seat chimes in with, because they're babes. So, there are Father Stephen stories worth hearing and telling. But mainly, we were all on a road together. And last year, you met another key player in all this. Deborah and I and our family's godfather was Father J. Stephen Freeman, who founded Oak Ridge, the St. Anne's Church in Oak Ridge. And he and Mother Beth are now moving to Greenville, back close to family. He's retired now. If you remember him, he's like black cassock, but he looks kind of like he's in ZZ Top. And he used to be a rock musician. What does it mean to say you have an Orthodox home? What does it mean to say, and the name of this first lecture is called Our Home is Different. Parents, this will happen. I don't care what church you're in this culture. If it's serious, at some point you're going to collide with the culture. And you're going to have to be able to look your children in the eyes and say, our home is different. We have beliefs, we're trying. We're not perfect. We're not legalistic about a lot of this, but we are trying to live a different life. Here is what we affirm, and this is what we're going to try to do. And sometimes that runs It collides with school, work, the shopping mall, if there is a shopping mall left, and it certainly collides with the world of mass media. A term that's crucial to today is called screens culture. And this is something that researchers began using this term right about the end of the cable TV era, and we began to move into the age of the internet. And simply, when I started teaching on these topics, the big issue was cable TV. How many TVs will you have in your home? And we'll come back to that in a second. But then all of a sudden the screens started multiplying and they went everywhere. And you couldn't say, well, we'll have a TV here. We'll put our computer there. All of a sudden, they're in your pocket. And we kind of went into stages with that. And very interesting people. One of the main people I'm going to be quoting today is a Jewish atheist who teaches at New York University. And he's trying to take churches by the shoulders and shake them and say, you're going to have to do something to deal with the power of screens in our lives, specifically smartphones. We live in a world where 25%, some put it as high as 40%, when surveyed, 25 to 40% of American teenagers say that if they have a smartphone, they are on it constantly. The average person who has a smartphone touches and uses their smartphone about 1,000 times a day. They at least touch it. Look at it, just quick, a glance. The phrase is doom scrolling, which is when you get the thing in your hand and you're on some piece of social media and it is programmed to keep you going to the next item, to the next item, to the next item, to the next item. And the researchers call this doom scrolling. Okay, that's where we're headed in this first lecture, is talking about the smartphone issue and what I believe Christian homes and bishops and clergy and others need to take why we need to take this so seriously. Okay, flashback. It's 1990, and I'm at Denver Theological Seminary, a journalist teaching at a seminary, in a class that eventually would have the name Exegete the Culture. The whole idea that at some point we need to be able to look at the culture and debate it. You know, listen to what it's saying and then try to do something to talk to it, deal with it, argue with it. And we talk about exegeting Scripture, something that everybody learns to do in seminaries. What I was arguing is at some point we're going to have to exegete the culture that's actually forming of the lives we're trying to reach. Not just outsiders, but the people in our own churches. So I'm in this class, and one day I wrote on the board, on a chalkboard, not a digital board of some kind, old school. I wrote the major forms of mass media on the board. You know, television is entertainment, news, movies, popular music, advertising. You know, I put the major forms of mass media up there. And a young seminarian, I believe he was Baptist, he could have been Presbyterian, evangelical Presbyterian. He says, at one point he said, wait a minute. Why are we talking about the media in a seminary? He said, this isn't why I came to seminary. This is world stuff. And I walked over and kind of stood in front of him and I said, okay, tell me, why are you at seminary? Why did you come to seminary? Baptists can be really articulate and communicate. They know how to preach. And this young man said, I came here to help make disciples for Jesus Christ. And I said, okay, pretend that I don't speak fluent Baptist. I speak evangelical. I was an evangelical Episcopalian at the time, but pretend that I don't know what that word means. What does the word discipleship mean to you? And he said, I want the faith we teach in our church to impact people's daily lives. I want it to impact how they view their families, how they view marriage, how they view their jobs, how they view school. I want to deal with the real stuff of life. And I said, very good. That's a really good way of talking about it. And then I turned and I pointed at the board. Movies, television as entertainment, advertising, popular music. I went, now these guys up here, these guys don't have anything to do with how your people live their lives, right? These principalities and powers up here don't have anything to do with what goes on in your lives. And I turned around and I could see kind of light bulbs going on. I was trying to get them to deal with what, at that moment, I ad-libbed. I said, we're dealing with instead of the separation of church and state, we all talk about the separation of church and state, we're dealing with the separation of church and life. And I improvised Terry Mattingly's secular mass media professor definition of discipleship. Now, in mass media studies, you often define things with questions, and you answer the questions and you have your definition. And I came up with, on the fly, at that moment at the front of that class, my definition of discipleship, which was, how do you spend your time, how do you spend your money, and how do you make your decisions? Now, there's more to discipleship than that. But what I argued is there's never less. At some point, if you're going to talk about discipleship as a way of life, you're going to deal with how do you spend your time, how do you spend your money, and the big one, how do you make your decisions? What's going on around you? What are the stories, the archetypes, the jokes, the movies? What are the things that end up influencing you the most? And I remember I told the students, folks, if you can answer those three questions without colliding with mass media in the life of Americans, this is 30 years ago, without running into that in the life of Americans, you have a promising future in ministry of the Amish. And they all laughed, except it wasn't funny because just that week, Newsweek had a story about the Amish dealing with a blitz of heroin addiction in their teenagers, and the rise of Amish heavy metal bands during the wilding years, when they let their teenagers go wild, and eventually they will choose whether they come back to the church as believers. If the Amish are dealing with these things, maybe we could. So let's back up for just a second and kind of walk through kind of media-wise how we got here. Now, for some of you, this will be in your lifetime, and for the very patient children, hang on. There's a lot of stuff for you coming in the second talk today when we talk about Christmas. So thank you for your patience, and hang in there. We used to live in a world of words. The dominant media for centuries was the printing press. The greatest thing to ever happen, not maybe greatest, the biggest thing to ever happen in the world of communications history was the printing press. Today we live in a world of images. The printing press focused on kind of linear thought, for the most part. There's exceptions, of course. Some book called Ulysses or something like that, but you can read a sentence and at the end you know what it means. And most people can agree on it, although I've heard arguments about theology that around tables that among orthobros that make me wonder sometimes if the sentences actually do make sense. But in a visual culture, you're primarily dealing with feelings and emotions. The old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, is important, but you may not agree on what the 1,000 words are. If you can, some of the classic music videos, REM's Losing My Religion leaps to mind. You get to the end of that REM video. Just, some of y'all even know who REM is. I mean, that's an ancient band now, but I'm getting a thumbs up from the priest. And of course, the other priest, we could talk about the Grateful Dead here in a while. But the point is, you get to the end of the video and you're all stirred up. You might even be mad. You might be crying, whatever, but what did it mean? We live in a school of advertising, and advertisements are what we always forget to talk about. We get hit with several hundred advertisements a day in one form or another. Some of them have them on the front of our shirts. We drive past them on the highway. Advertisements are everywhere. And advertisements, with very few exceptions today, aren't actually trying to convince you of something. Not like, this makes sense. Buy this to accomplish this. It's more emotional. There's some ads on right now with Johnny Depp and a guitar in the middle of a desert, and it has something to do with perfume. And I still don't understand what that ad is supposed to be saying. But it's all about how you feel. And one scholar put it this way: the theory of modern advertising and other forms of visual media is consume this product and become the person in the image, in the ad. The major messages of advertising are, you don't look like this and you don't own this. I love all the stretchy jeans. I don't know why I'm talking about stretchy jeans right now. It's a stage of life. Why are all the stretchy jeans ads featuring people that weigh 130 pounds and they're like 25 years old? That's not the target. Consume the product, become the person in the ad. And it hit me when this scholar in his essay said, we have created products that contain a soul. You're not just buying a Prius, you're the kind of person who buys a Prius. You're not just wearing an Apple Watch. You're the kind of person who prefers Apple over the demons of Microsoft or something. Consume the product. Become the image. Folks, this is a sacramental system. This is, we want to change your life and change how you portray yourself to the world. Consume it, become it. In this visual culture, it's very hard to say things with a great deal of, the word specificity leaps to mind, but I have no idea what that means right now. It's hard to be concrete. One of the books that changed my life was a book by a sociologist, a devout Christian, by the way, named James Davison Hunter. And he wrote a book called Culture Wars, The Struggle to Define America. Came out in about 1990. Well, we all use the term culture wars all the time, and it just means people yelling at each other about social issues, right? That's what it means. That's not how he used the term. Hunter argues that we live in a culture where it's hard to believe that anything is absolutely, eternally true. I talked to him about this once. We live in a culture that is technologically hostile to the very concept of doctrine. It's about emotions and feelings. It's about the images and becoming what's in the images. And he said we used to be divided by Baptist and Catholic and Jewish and all this. Now, all of the religious groups are fighting about the same subjects. And he said we've ended up with two forms of religion in American culture. This is 33 years ago. One, he said, he calls it the camp of the progressives. He deliberately did not use the word liberal. He said because they often are not actually liberal. He was way ahead of his time. The camp of the progressives. The camp of the progressives believe that truth is experiential. Truth is what emerges from your individual life. Trust the Force, Luke. I mean, every Disney movie essentially says, right? Follow your heart. Become who you're supposed to become. With surgery if necessary. And the whole thing, he says, is that truth is only personal. The other camp he calls, he's not an Orthodox person, but he says the other he calls the camp of the Orthodox. And the Orthodox may not believe all the same eternal absolute truths, but they believe it's possible to have transcendent truth. And that's what they're seeking. He said, so you may end up with an Orthodox Jew that on many issues of life has more in common with an Eastern Orthodox priest or a Southern Baptist pastor or an African Anglican or something than they do with a Reformed Jew. I remember once it hit me, and I wrote a column about this. I was covering the pro-life march day in Denver, Colorado. And on one side of the Capitol, there was a Roman Catholic archbishop with a charismatic Episcopal bishop, Bishop William C. Fry, next to a disciple, not a disciple of Christ, a independent Christian churches person, next to a evangelical Presbyterian, next to a alternative Methodist, next to a Orthodox Jew, and they're all here, and these are the pro-lifers. A Missouri Synod Lutheran. You could go down the whole list of the denominations. On the other side was the alternative, the opposing, and there was a feminist nun next to an Episcopal priest, next to an American Baptist, next to an ELCA Lutheran, next to a PCUSA Presbyterian, next to a Reformed Jew. And so here's the same traditions lined up on both sides. And Hunter said one was involved in a life of emotion and feeling, and the other was people who were seeking and truly believed that God had revealed truth on certain subjects. And they may not even agree with what they were, but they would march in the street for the right to define that some things are true. They were basically arguing not just with themselves, they were arguing with the media and trying to get the media to take their perspective. But guess what? The great mass of the media was in the essence of the camp of the progressive. One of the reasons I've always argued and led a website about this for 2 decades, the media doesn't get religion. They don't understand. I'm using get in the way the old feminist sense. Those men, they just don't get it. They don't grasp why this is so important to some people. Now back to technology, and we'll return kind of that whole, you'll see how that fits in. I began teaching in the age of cable television. A Jewish writer in New York named Marie Wynn wrote a book about the power of television. She called it the plug-in drug. And one of the things she said was, if you allow your children to have a TV in their room, you will get the family life you deserve. Another one of her sayings that just stuck in my mind was she said, we're allowing our children to be raised by people that if they showed up on our front doorstep, we would call 911. And she said, it's actually the parents who are addicted to the TV more than the children. Just sit still. Here, watch Peter Pan for the 25,000th time. Do something. She said, but we're not thinking what that screen has replaced in our lives. Now, I'm going to argue, as someone who loves film and who teaches mass culture, we need to think seriously about what makes certain messages in our culture good, which ones are kind of iffy. I'm involved in an argument right now with a lot of people about the movie Wicked, and I'm trying to get them to think about where the play came from and the book it came from and what the core message is. And even if it's catchy as heck and it's very high quality and it's a lot of fun, what's it saying? And one of the things they're telling me is, who cares? It's just a movie. Folks, it's not just a movie. You're consuming it. Computers then showed up. And computers really made something obvious to us. Mass media is not something you carry into your home and sit it down and it's sitting there. Mass media is a door into your home. The issue is what comes through the door, not just the box. And computers began to make this really obvious, because even early in the computer age, if you signed up to something, the box could talk back to you. In some cases today, if you sign up to a website, or you sign a certain group and you give them your information, they may contact you for real. Children are signing up for Instagram feeds and Facebook posts that lead to groups that will contact them, sometimes through their school, not through the computer. They could trace you back to the real you. That wasn't that obvious with computers at first. But along came video games and a lot of other things that began to eat a lot of time. I remember at Palm Beach Atlantic University, we did a story on video game addiction. And we wrote the story for the student newspaper because a new edition of Halo came out. Now, does anybody remember the game Halo? It was huge. And when a new edition would come out, young men on the campus would vanish. They would stop going to class. One of them ended up dropping out of school. What really keyed the story was a dear friend. It broke up his engagement. His fiance broke up their engagement because the guy couldn't stop playing Halo. Parentheses. One of the things that scholars are learning today is that social media and screens culture is different for guys than it is for girls. For guys, the primary issue is computers, games, frankly, pornography, and a host of other things. And I'm not going to talk about that a whole lot. But one of the things that the researchers are saying, what's the proper age for your child to have a smartphone? One of the shortest answers that people are giving now, you give them a smartphone at the age you think they can handle unchosen contact with the world of pornography. First exposure to pornography in our culture today is at age 9 to 11 through computers and smartphones. Girls, the crucial issue is self-image, body image, personality, and social media. That's the big connection. The symbol for this is Instagram. TikTok, Instagram, and TikTok as well. Mobile phones arrived. Now, some of you will remember these. Remember the ones that flipped open? And all of a sudden, your children had their hands under the table and they had magically memorized the keyboard, and they could send themselves long, involved texts without their parents knowing, because they had learned how to do all 3 clicks for a J, 2 clicks for an I, and they knew all the secret code. Now, the kids are looking at me going like, what the heck? Well, this was before you had keyboards and before you had touch screens and stuff. And some of the kids, by the way, if this will be a flashback, they didn't realize that each one of those messages cost a certain amount, and then the parents would get something at the end of the month that they owed the phone company like $550 for texting, because the kids couldn't stop texting. There were cartoons about kids sitting in the back seat of cars texting each other so the parents wouldn't hear what they were saying. Father Stephen, is this like early high school for you, college? Yes. Somewhere in, no, Jocelyn's going, no. But the phones, here's the key. The phones connected people to each other in different ways. The phones didn't connect you to the internet. There was a lot of positive things going on with computers during that age. I remember in the 90s, I would say things like, yes, the same thing, the same media that allows you to have access to horrible stuff also allows us to have an underground seminary that can be used by people in China. And that's true. I am not arguing today that these forms of media are automatically bad or evil or broken, flawed, sinful by their very nature. The question is, How do we use them? When do we use them? And do we relate them to our life? How do you spend your time? How do you spend your money? How do you make your decisions? With the arrival of the smartphone, the world literally changes. And by the way, we're going to take a very short break here in a second. So if people need to go to the restroom, or if it's warmed up enough for kids to run and play, I will totally understand, okay? We're going to take a break here in just a second. In 2007, the late Steve Jobs, the man who created Apple and Pixar and a lot of other stuff, Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, and the whole world changed. There was a very interesting moment up on stage where he's fiddling with the thing, and he goes, "You know, this is kind of addicting. I could play with this thing a long time." Yeah, the whole world could. Also, if you look into his private life and read the biographies, very early on, Steve Jobs realized, I'm not going to let my children have these things. Steve Jobs' children didn't get iPhones. Steve Jobs' children didn't get iPads. In fact, a survey of the major leaders of big tech found that hardly any of the leaders of big tech who are parents allow their children to use the products their companies make. The New York Times ran a story a couple of years ago about the quest for nannies who were hired specifically to monitor children's lives to keep them off of social media. It was the primary thing the nannies were asked to do, and thus the nannies had to give up their iPhones for the whole time they were at work. And a lot of them quit because they couldn't do it. And it turned into a very interesting New York Times piece, which I thought was remarkably candid about how this sifts down to the level of life. But if you look into books like The Anxious Generation, a book we can talk about at lunch, by Jonathan Haidt, certain things in our culture, there's a phenomena called the hockey stick. And the hockey stick is when you're going along in the culture and all of a sudden statistics don't just gradually go up, they go straight up. And if you look at female life and behavior in America, 2010, 2 years after the release of the iPhone, is the hockey stick. At that moment in our culture, the numbers go straight up. Anxiety. Anxiety has increased as a diagnosed condition in American life, especially among young females, by like 800% since 2010. Anxiety, depression, sleep deprivation. It's a major problem right now in our culture. Attention spans, ADHD diagnoses are up 80%. Gender dysphoria, suicide numbers, hockey stick, all these things go straight up. Now, is the release of the phone the cause of all this? Is correlation the same thing as causation? We used to argue about this. I think the argument is stopping. As I'll mention in a moment, when the state of California, you know, the epitome of liberal life in America, with the exception maybe of Portlandia or something like that, California has now voted to ban smartphones in public schools. That should tell you that certain things are being accepted at the levels of power. So I'll end this first half with a quote. This is from a Southern Baptist thinker named Al Mohler in Louisville, who's a very articulate Presbyterian, Calvinist. He's not Presbyterian because he's Baptist. He's a Calvinist Baptist, Reformed thinker. The iPhone has become something considered a necessity. And in this world, if we're playing by the world's terms, of course, it is. The question the iPhone represents to us is, who owns whom? Do we own the iPhone, or increasingly, immorally, does the iPhone own us? The rise of the smartphone specifically has more than anything else removed parents as the ultimate authorities and sources of truth in the lives of their own children. Jonathan Haidt says we have gone from a play-based childhood, an imagination-based childhood, to a phone-based childhood. Statistically, it's impossible to argue that he's wrong on that. By the way, I got in touch with President Al Mohler of Southern Seminary and said, do any of the courses on your seminary address this? Has this found its way into pastoral care classes, youth work classes? And his aide got back to me and said, no, not yet. Take a break and let's come back in about 5 minutes, okay? 5 or 10. We live in a fallen world. 10 minutes. Where are we now? Like I said, in the year 2024, we began the year with everybody arguing about, is this whole smartphone thing true? Are they blowing it out of proportion? We ended the year with like half the states in America are voting on whether to remove these things from schools. Australia is thinking about making it illegal to sign up for social media until you're 16. I mean, we're beginning to see hardcore action in the secular world. Well, the man that I mentioned earlier, Jonathan Haidt, has written a bestseller called The Anxious Generation, and the subtitle will light your hair on fire: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. And he is a professor at New York University in ethics and in social behavior, really, as much as anything. And like I said, he's a Jewish atheist, but he said he's having the most success in Orthodox day schools. No surprise. Orthodox Jewish day schools are some of the first people that began to listen to him. And I'll get to his views on religion in just a second. I interviewed him for about an hour, and a long version of that, a lot of the text is on Get Religion. I did not seek the rights to put the actual recording online. That would have been a whole nother level, of copyright and everything else. So I just told him I'll put a transcript up of a lot of it. Let me listen to Jonathan Haidt for a moment. Young people who spend as many as 10 or more hours a day focusing on digital screens, and 10 hours a day is normal. That's not obsessive. 10 hours a day is normal. They will find it all but impossible to listen to an adult talk about anything. And he said, and in the studies, he said, religious sanctuaries are the ultimate example of where the young people will not listen to an adult in charge. Religious sanctuaries. Quote, as long as children have a phone-based childhood, there is very little hope for spiritual education at all. An essential precondition is to delay the phone-based life until the age of 18. I would say don't let them fall off into cyberspace, because once they do, it's going to be spiritually degrading for the rest of their lives. There's not so much you can do in church if they're spending 10 hours a day on their phones. That's pretty blunt stuff. He's beginning to dialogue more with religious leaders about this. I think I would love to see him speak to, like, say, in the OCA, it would be the Diocese of the South or something like that. It'd be very interesting to see him talk to clergy about this. I'm just keep reading. Half of American teenagers say they are online almost all the time. That means they are never fully present. Never, ever. They are always partly living in terms of what's happening with their post, what's happening online. There's a degradation effect that is overwhelming, but most people haven't noticed. I am hoping that religious communities will both notice it and be able to counteract it. But you can't counteract it if the kid still has a phone in their pocket. The phone is that powerful. He said, under normal conditions, religious leaders are quick to spot threats to children. To Haidt's dismay, this has not been the case with smartphones. If the leaders of various denominations would make a clear statement about how the phone-based childhood is a threat not only to their mental health, but to their spiritual health, it would help. We could only save our kids from this if we have the churches, families, and schools working together. This week, I wrote a pair of posts at Rational Sheep, actually it was last week, about, actually it's my national column now that I think about it. I wrote a pair of columns about, are religious groups going to get into this, and why are they scared? And the folks I talked to said the main reason that the main reason that clergy are worried is they're scared of causing discord in homes. They're scared of causing arguments. And they know that parents are very scared to talk about this. A professor at the School of Divinity at Kearney University in Langhorne, Pennsylvania, had another interesting way. His name is Keith Plummer. Father Stephen, this is something that you and I talked briefly about the other day. Far too many Christians ignore the relationship between technology, media theory, and spiritual formation. We have been prone to assess digital technology primarily, not exclusively, on the basis of the content it can provide to people in our churches. Simply avoiding sexually explicit content is not enough. At some point, we have to question the formative power of the technology itself. Yes, the big question right now, and I've been involved in these debates, there are people who believe you simply have to get rid of the technology. And for theological reasons, I can't go there. I mean, I see, just take a word from Calvin, from John Calvin, a phrase from John Calvin, our creation is both glorious and fallen. In the ancient churches, that's creation theology. You know, we live in a world that's good but fallen. It reveals the image of God, but we wrestle with the brokenness of it. That's still how I want to look at technology. But Haidt also notes a lot of parents are convinced that that smartphone will make their children safer. And a startling percentage of new parents and parents in this age want the smartphone so they can track their children. It's become a form of helicopter parenting. And I find it so ironic that in an age when parents, a woman in Georgia the other day was not arrested, but was called into the police department for letting her son walk a mile to go visit like a great aunt. And someone saw the 10-year-old walking down the road by themselves and called the police. And the mother was, arrested, so to speak, for being a bad parent. Jonathan Haidt stresses, no, let your children go to the playground. Let an older child shepherd 2 or 3 others. Teach them some responsibility. Teach them how to play, for Pete's sake. Let them run off in the woods and build a fort. The evil people are online way more than some people who are going to show up at your playground. You know, we've got this safety issue, he said, turned inside out. The people who are stalking your children have all gone online or use the online world as a way to contact them and then form a relationship. I'm not going to dwell on that. But here's the point. Isn't this a relevant question? Aren't there moral implications of this? Again, for Jonathan Haidt, we overprotect our children in the real world and we underprotect them online. There it all is in a sentence. Haidt says believers need to know that researchers have proven that religious communities and families, especially in conservative, small o forms of faith. I had told him at that point that I was Orthodox, and he was, of course, talking about the Orthodox Jews. And he kept saying, but small o Orthodox religious groups with standards and convictions. They are raising healthier children right now. He said the most serious, can you imagine the guy from New York University saying this? The kids who made it through are especially those who are locked into binding communities and religious communities. It is the secular kids and the kids in progressive families who tend to be the ones who are washed out to sea. The issue, a lot of the anxiety issues and gender dysphoria and all of the most extreme forms of this mental health crisis, frankly, are hitting wealthy, progressive families much more than conservative, blue-collar families, etc. A Jewish atheist at NYU has said, we've got to have the religious groups take this on. If they won't do it, he's stunned. And I've had dialogues with people, but he's stunned that they can ban smartphones in public schools in California and a national network of classical schools can't do it. Because they're scared of offending their parents and that the parents won't allow their children to come to the school if they try to intervene on smartphones. Okay, what are we supposed to do? This is where I'm going to end. I'm leaving a lot of time after the second presentation for at least 45 to 50 minutes of Q&A and talking, okay? So if you've got some questions, please write them down. Take notes in your smartphone. And we will have a lot of time to talk, I promise you that, okay? What are we supposed to do? A couple of years ago, in the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Denver, a group of teenagers had a tragic situation. They had 3 of their friends, I believe it was 3, who essentially were bullied into suicide. And all of the bullying was occurring online. A lot of it happens at night after the parents have gone to bed and the kids are there with their smartphone and the texts just keep coming. It's part of the sleep deprivation thing. These young people decided to create what they called App-Free October. And they went to their friends and they asked everybody not to give up their smartphone, but at least disarm the 3 or 4 major apps that most of this was coming through. And with the help of their local parishes, and the local archbishop even noticed this, they decided, one young man told me, we actually decided we would try to live the life we're pretending to live on social media. And so they live in Colorado. They organized hikes, skiing. They went to their church and learned how to cook, and then took the stuff they cooked to homes for the elderly. And while they were at the homes for the elderly, they had board games. And they played board games all afternoon with lonely people. And they would read a book together, and they would do public service things together. And for the whole month, once a week, the young people got together and did something that they organized in the real world. Now, this was a tremendous success, but I'm sad that their motto, don't post a story, live one. It didn't carry over to the next generation. And I'm even more disappointed, and I followed up on this, their parish didn't follow up either. And the Archdiocese let it go. I've looked online and I can find no evidence that App-Free October survived. To me, it's the very model of something that shows us kind of a way forward on some of this. The Archbishop of Denver noted that bullying always attacks the basic dignity of another human being through demeaning the person. With smartphones everywhere, bullies gained access to their peers on a scale never seen before. Not only did fallen human nature obtain a virtual megaphone it could use 24/7, but the anonymity offered by some apps removed the accountability provided by platforms that require users to identify themselves. One of the arguments right now is, can we at least make it to where children cannot sign up for these apps until a certain age, or without active participation in ways that can't be faked by their parents? So what are we supposed to do? Well, I've created a very pushy list of TMAT ideas. And this is where I want to go back. TMAT's my nickname online. It started with Frederica. This is where I'm going to meddling. But I want you to hear me say, these are ideas gained from people who've been studying this all the way from the cable TV era. And I know that different families have different approaches to this. I personally am not someone who doesn't want any media in the home. When our children were young-ish, and our daughter was in high school, and we were in Palm Beach Atlantic University, we were in West Palm Beach. And people would walk in and look at the shelves of DVDs, and they say, wow, look at all those DVDs. Y'all watch a lot of TV. And I went, actually, these are the ones we found worth keeping. I would rather my children, and they'll give you the quotes to back it up, I would rather have them watch Casablanca for the 100th time than watch something, frankly, horrible. One of the most important things your children can see you do is turn something off. And then tell them why. Like, gosh, that's pathetic. Or that's boring. It's horrible. This thing doesn't make any sense. Let's go for a walk and we'll come back and then pick a film that your family really likes and make that your movie night for the week. Pop popcorn, turn up the stereo speakers. I think you should have one TV in your home and put it in a theater. Go for it. Embrace the greatness of film. We'll come back to that even during Christmas. If you haven't noticed, Christmas movies are a sort of big thing. They start before Halloween now, whatever Christmas movie means. Okay, so what am I suggesting? Study your home and try to figure out where technology is being used and how it's being used. Just look at it as a basic thing. You're trying to avoid individuals being in different rooms, binging with no accountability. If you have one main computer, and by the way, you have to back up a generation. Young people used to want laptops, just kids. Do people still want laptops today? Or they moved totally to tablet? Are laptops still a big deal? In schools, are y'all getting laptops in schools? And stuff. A lot of homeschoolers, I've had conversations with parents about this. They did their homeschooling primarily through laptops, not realizing that the main thing they did was move their children's life into the laptop. And then once it got in the laptop, they couldn't get it out. One parent said to me, we were ready for television, we were not ready for the internet. Husbands and wives should know each other's passwords. At the very least, parents can strive for family members to eat dinner together with no digital devices sitting on the table. Now, I have to admit, I struggle with that. I struggle with that, especially eating out, right? But glance at it and put the thing away. Go for long walks. Find a way that you can talk. I have a brother-in-law who's a professional marriage counselor, and he said he's always been struck by how many relationships begin at college and in settings where the future husband and wife have the time to go for walks together. And when he takes a couple for marriage counseling, they have to agree that they will walk together for at least 30 minutes 3 times a week. It's a condition for him taking them as a client, which I think is fascinating. He said they simply don't have any contact anymore. Okay. No internet-connected screens in bedrooms. At night, create a zone in the family room or the kitchen where all the smartphones are plugged in to recharge. Except for one parent who has to have a phone in case of family emergencies in the extended family. But put get the phones out of the bedrooms. Most of the abuse of smartphones, the worst abuse occurs after the parents are asleep and the screens are still on in the children's rooms. Parents should install software security programs on the home Wi-Fi system. While admitting that the children probably know more about it than they do and will probably be able to get around it by the age of about 12. This is something that I honestly think churches, well, let me put a couple of things into one bag for just a second. I think every church in America should have one event a year dealing with the role of technology in the home. Just this week, I was contacted by a man who works for a company that creates what are called dumb phones. And dumb phones are making a comeback. A dumb phone is a phone that is not connected to the internet, but the child can still call home, come get me, band practice is over, I fell down, and you can still text on it, but you're not carrying the internet in your pocket. These are making a serious comeback. Parents, if you go to a local store that sells smartphones and ask to see the dumb phones, they'll probably have some now. It might be too big of an intersection between the church and commerce, but I almost think if we did an event on technology once a year, you could have a table with flyers telling people they're going to cost you half as much, they're going to be safer, and the kids still have a lifeline to you, but they're not plugged into the internet. Anyway, a man who runs one of these companies contacted me this week after my columns on the topic in national newspapers the previous 2 weeks. And he said, I run a company that does this, or I work for a company that does this, and I've been contacting religious denominations and churches, offering to send them information, giving them special deals, we'll cut the rates even more, free phone with a plan that's going to cost you a third as much as a smart, I'm trying to see that people know that this is a real option. He said, I haven't had a single returned phone call in all of my work on this topic. Okay, when do they go on smartphones? The general consensus is you need an intense period of preparation and that they go to college with a phone. They're probably not going to be able to survive at college without one, in classes and everything else. But what you've hoped is you've had a decade of contact with your children that you wouldn't have had otherwise. You have a decade in which to work on this. Should clergy deal with this? I believe desperately that organized religious institutions need to start addressing this topic. How do you spend your time? How do you spend your money? How do you make your decisions? That, my friends, is the stuff of actual life. That is the stuff of confession. That is the stuff of spiritual guidance. The people who are coming through the mass media doors into your home are not the friends of your faith. For the most part, there are exceptions, and we need to celebrate the exceptions. An anecdote I don't have in my outline, but let me tell it. While I was at Denver Seminary, a local Baptist church, which had a huge singles ministry, invited me to come do a retreat for their singles ministry. And they said, well, we want you to do what you do at the seminary. Come show a movie and then interpret what it's saying and talk to them about the film. I said, I want to show 2 films. I want to show the great Academy Award-winning performance of Robert Duvall as the drunken country singer. And the name of the movie is Tender Mercies. This is probably one of the greatest depictions of serious faith and marriage in a film you will ever see. I said, I want to show Tender Mercies, and I want to show, I'm having a senior moment, The Julia Roberts movie about the prostitute with a heart of gold.
Pretty Woman.
Pretty Woman. And the associate pastor went, "We can't show Pretty Woman on a Southern Baptist retreat." And my mind flashed back to an Old Testament image, and I said, if you can find me 10 people in your seniors department that haven't seen Pretty Woman already, I won't show it. Okay, 5 people. And they couldn't find anyone in their singles department that hadn't seen Pretty Woman. And I said, why do you want to show Pretty Woman? I want them to watch that movie, and I want them to watch Tender Mercies, and then I want to say, which of these 2 movies did you actually enjoy the most? Which one struck you as slow and kind of strange? What has your culture trained you to think romance is? But in your own personal life, which relationship do you actually want? And of course, what they said, the relationship in Tender Mercies is a beautiful picture of Christian love. That's what we want. I went, okay, well then why didn't you enjoy the movie? Well, it was boring. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't fun. Well, parts of that, frankly, were fun. But what I told the associate pastor was, trust me, watching Pretty Woman in a room full of Southern Baptists will be different than watching it at the local theater. And sure enough, that retreat was a smashing success if the goal was to get a bunch of single adults to think seriously about what it is they actually want in marriage. I showed them an Academy Award-winning film, too, for Best Actor, by, I would argue, one of the 2 or 3 greatest actors of our generation, or at least my generation. Jonathan Haidt, back to Jonathan Haidt. This is how he puts it in messages to secular groups. No smartphones before high school, at the very least. If you can hold off to 18, that's even better. We've got to clear them out of middle schools and elementary schools. He said, or it's gone. The education process is gone. 2, no social media at all until 16, at the very earliest. Again, he would argue for 18 is better. He stresses the platforms were not made for children. They appear to be especially harmful to children since they were designed to addict the user. Dopamine, is that the term? The substance in your body that makes you excited? They're designed to make you want to do the next click and the next click and the next click. Well, maybe I can get so-and-so to like this post. And when they do, it's like, hey, I'm a success. They're designed to keep you clicking. And he says, and by the age of about 12 or 13, the most serious addiction is in place. He argues for phone-free schools. There's really no argument for letting kids have the greatest distraction device ever invented in their hands during a school class. The greatest distraction device ever invented. The 4th one, and this is, I think, where churches can have some fun thinking about this. He really thinks we need more independence for children, more playtime, more responsibility in the real world. And he said we urgently need churches to get involved in this. He said whether it's hiking or fishing or, organizing with other parishes to create your own low-level, non-competitive softball leagues, anything. Get children a chance to play. One woman in England organized a situation where, and she said, now I stayed in a home less than a mile away, but she let her kids organize a trip to camp out in a park out in the English countryside. One dumb phone for emergency contact, and the kids got there using mass transit. They just literally took them to the train, put them on the train and said, see you in 2 days. The kids were totally responsible for their own cooking. It rained. The kids had to deal with that. And the kids came back and went, when can we do it again? Please let us do it again. We talked until 2 or 3 in the morning. I'll never forget it. Well, that scares me a little as a paranoid grandparent, but could the church be involved in that in some way? More play-based childhood. Our home is different. Also has to correspond with our church is different. And this leads me to the second half of the program today, which is about Christmas. But I'll end and take a few questions right now. I'll end with a little bit more from Jonathan Haidt. What are the issues that are linked to the smartphone crisis? And this is where, to me, if seminaries haven't, and I'm sorry to be hard on seminaries, but nothing gets into the church without the permission of the pulpit, if people have a pulpit. Nothing reaches the church without a pulpit, and very few things make it into the pulpit without some sort of permission from the institutions of their denomination. And seminaries are right at the top of that. Marriage formation. Marriage, I saw a statistic the other day that 30 to 40% of young adults in America now will never marry. The New York Times did a huge story just a few days ago about the anxiety and stress and depression setting in on baby boomer parents who are realizing they will never have grandchildren. And looking back at the choices they made in their lives that may have produced children with no marriages, children with no children. The anxiety issue, the depression issue, the rising of treating everything. We don't even try counseling anymore. We go straight to drugs. And we have the highest levels of drug use on children now. If you can't control them with media, use drugs. At the very least, he said parishes could offer a once-a-year program on the issues in the home. Well, that's amen to that, I say. I'll end with 2 long quotes from this Jewish atheist in Manhattan. I have tremendous respect for religion, for religious communities. If we don't have religious communities, we end up making some community that's quasi-religious, and it works out very badly. Fake community is much worse, he says, than real community. Adolescent development needs to be guided by elders in their community. That is how you pass on a culture. Once you get a phone-based childhood, there's very little room for mentors of any kind unless they're online. There's just no room. So what they get, in essence, are mentors online who are chosen by an algorithm and sent to them because of the extremities in their life. Last quote. Modern life continues to eat away at the traditions of the past, he said. As life gets easier, as people get wealthier, as they move away from the old days, authority tends to decay. There tends to be less respect for authority, less respect for the old ways and the old traditions. Kids need structure. They need moral rules. While it seems as though anything is permissible, that doesn't make people happy. It makes them feel disoriented and lost. Our home is different. Our church is different. Yes, I went to Medlin. But folks, these issues are not going to go away. And I hope and pray churches will start paying attention. Thank you. Are there any questions before we break for lunch? Yes, sir.
every year in September, a bunch of kids are dropped off by their parents at colleges.
Right.
Some percentage of them are never seen again. They just freedom for the first time. They may have come from a home that was overly protective or whatever. They get freedom, so they just disappear. And where I was, it was Los Angeles. And so the idea of waiting till they're 18 and giving them a phone isn't enough. You have to prep them.
Well, he said that. He believes there needs to be intense discussions and preparations for that.
And the other thing is that, you can tell your kids whatever you want about the phone, but if you're sitting there doing this yourself.
Yeah. And the problem is that our culture is now organized around these devices. One of the reasons churches, evangelicals in particular, struggle with this subject is they got into this mindset that every new technology that comes along is a gift by God to the church to use to help make life better for their people. And it's very hard to kind of put down the smartphone when everything in their church is coming to people through their smartphones. Well, I think there's good and there's bad, and we're going to have to wrestle with that. But I think the critical issue is schools, I think, is really a big one. And I also think that in Orthodoxy, the conversations are beginning to heat up about where do kids go to school, what are they studying, where can they go to college, can we afford it, can we take a different approach to organizing the years from about 12 years old to like 30? Is there something we can do? By the way, I think a lot of this is linked to, this was the subject of my podcast this week because of a story in the New York Post. Why are so many young men turning to Orthodoxy? Now, I cannot speak for all of these guys, but I've had conversations with dozens. And I don't think it's wrong to say that one of the things that's leading a lot of young adults to Orthodoxy is a realization that they need structure and that they yearn for beauty and truth and something solid, that things have happened in their life and they want another chance. That's the flip side of some of these issues we're talking about, isn't it? And I'm very happy they're coming to our churches. But when you look at the culture as a whole, statistically, it's important that a lot of these young people are turning to churches. But we also have to look at the society as a whole and kind of be honest about some of these trends. So yes, by the way, Haidt also said, by the way, when they go off to college, make them pay for the smartphone. In other words, make them pay for the smartphone. In other words, it's a part of their life and they have to pay for it. I guess maybe some parents could agree with that, but there's no perfect way through this. It's a real issue. It's a complex issue, but we're not going to be able to hide from it. Silence is not an option. Okay.
At 18, when all of a sudden you get a burst of freedom, and you're not prepared for it.
Well, and the other thing, we started saying this in the 90s when I was at Milligan College. Professors in college began to say that college is the new high school and grad school is the new college. When I arrived at Milligan in 1993, what I loved to do more than anything else was talk to students about what their dreams were in life and what could I do to help them get there. By the time I left Milligan College in 1999, students didn't have any idea what they wanted to do with their life. They had no concept other than I need X amount of money to enjoy what I've been told life is. So the 90s were ahead of the storm, technologically speaking, but other trends were already beginning to emerge. Other questions? I hope you've written some down. Yes, Father.
I guess it's like a comment, but I know that you'll have some additional comments to add to it. So, first of all, I think that you touched on, especially with regards to the people whose work you're basing your presentation
right.
on, that continually throughout all of that, there's an emphasis on what do we do for our children and how do we impact them? But that conversation, that topic has to include what are we as adults doing,
Yes.
and how do we handle ourselves? Because
Right.
The word that hasn't been used very much today is addiction, and that there is an addiction that takes place with technology by design. And that there's an incentive of profit, market share, and so on the part of the tech companies to design the hardware and the software to gain as much of our attention as possible.
Yeah.
For us to rely on this, but we think of the smartphone as a convenient thing because it can be our wake-up alarm and our reminders and our calendar and so on. But they've designed all of that so we can integrate itself into our lives more and more. And I'm still guilty as anyone in that. Anyway, my point is that addiction is a big part of all of this, and we need to be very, very aware of the ways in which that addiction comes into the lives of us who are adults as well, and also those who are children. Are you aware, and others that here are aware of Instagram rolling out Instagram Teen?
I had not heard that.
Yeah. I've seen it advertised. Presentary's seen it advertised, and it's and it's a modified version of Instagram that is locked down in certain ways that is supposedly safe for teens to use, right? I look at it and you hear the advertising and that's the way it's presented. It's like Instagram, it's hearing the concerns and now it's got this version of Instagram that's safe for teens to use. What I hear is, Marlboro's coming out with
light versions of cigarettes, right?
Yeah. It's like we've cut the nicotine in half, so it's now safe for your kids to smoke.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of the idea. And I also say that guilty as as a parent. We've got a teenager who's using Instagram. I will fully disclose that. And anyway, as far as the addiction goes, I'm curious of what your thoughts on based on your research.
Well, two other things I'll mention related to this. One, I think it was very prophetic that the Antiochian Archdiocese took one of its most talented priests, Andrew Stephen Damick, and assigned him to the internet, and specifically to look at the world of internet orthodoxy and try to help pastors understand who's on your side and who's dangerous, and what's going on out there, and when people show up that have read this and this and this and think they know more about the faith than the priest, a lot of that's coming off the internet. I thought it was very important that they realized we're going to have to get some stuff out there on these topics. The book seriously needs to be updated, but a great book for parents is called The Tech-Wise Family by an evangelical named Andy Crouch. And there are some very interesting dialogues between Andy Crouch and Jonathan Haidt that are now online. They did another one just the other day, but I don't think it's up online. And Crouch is where I got the idea of the symbol of if children growing up as a part of their daily life see the parents take their phones and plug them in at the same location the kids are going to plug their phones in to charge them up overnight, and it's not going, and the parents say, but Dad, you've got a smartphone in your bed. Well, yes, as you know, your grandmother is struggling with this health issue right now. This is an emergency lifeline to other members of our family. So I have one phone, it's set to where only the following 10 phone numbers can ring through. The only way this phone can ring is when certain members of our family call me. If they've learned that at age 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, it's a better chance that they're going to accept some sort of structure later on because they grew up with it in their family. Just like in our house, the one TV with the DVDs we've chosen, and we have movie night. We became the weird house where all the friends went to watch weird movies. Most famously, the celebration of one party to rule them all, where we took the extended versions of Lord of the Rings. We started at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we went till 11 o'clock at night. And we watched the entire thing. And we paused for Hobbit food and snacks and lunch and all that. And it turned into a great party. But we also stressed out, how many of you have read the books? The rule in our family, was you don't watch a movie until you've read the book. We saw this with one of our grandkids, wanted so badly to go see the extended versions in the real theaters. And he read the entire...
He had read books one. He had read book one and was, there are three, how many books? There's 3 books. Right?
Yeah, of course.
So he had not read any of the last book and he was halfway through book 2. So in like 3 days, he read all, he finished them. So that,
He read this is 11 years old.
Yeah.
Brendan read the entire second half of The Lord of the Rings in like 3 days. So he could go with his father to the theater to see the extended edition on the real screen. They were following the rule, we read the books first. And I remember telling our kids, the author's world is in the book. Now that doesn't make it perfect, but that means it's what the author intended to say to you. So we need to know that first before we let Disney do something to it.
And then you can talk about it. And there, every once in a while, a movie comes out that's better than the books. And if it is, then you can talk about that.
Yeah.
I think How to Train Your Dragon is
The movie's much better than the...
much better than the books. But, and yeah, so it's just...
We could talk about some of these things over lunch. Any other pre-lunch questions? Yes. I see that hand.
How to Train Your Dragon books are better.
Can I do what?
How to Train Your Dragon books are better.
You think How to Train the Books are better? How to Train the Books are better? Okay. That's good. That's fine. Well, I made that comment when I'd only read book 1 and seen the first movie. And then
Weird things started happening in the second movie, and some other stuff. But I will also say I'm a huge fan of movie soundtracks. I think the movie soundtracks, and I think the movie soundtrack to How to Train Your Dragon is easily one of the top 5, like of the last decade. It's an incredible score. Okay, folks, let's take a break. You've been very attentive. This was the heavy part, and we're going to have, I hope, some more fun in this, some additional fun or initial fun in the second half. Thank you all.